Hello and welcome to Career Conversations. My name is Richard Retha, and this is a program of the APH Connect Center and Career Connect. Today we have the pleasure of having Greg DeWall. He is a recreation supervisor, assistant supervisor with Lincoln, Nebraska Parks and Recreation. Greg, good afternoon and welcome.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
And Greg and I go back. I've known Greg for several years, and he's a great colleague and a wonderful guest who's going to be with us this afternoon. Uh, going to look up my questions here and we're going to get started. And I will offer to the audience as you are coming in, we will have the chat open and we will be encouraging questions from the audience to Greg throughout. And after Greg and I are in the midst of our interview, we will check for questions and prioritize them in about 15, 20 minutes. So as you hear about Greg, you read his blog, please ask questions. That's what drives career conversations and makes this so unique and so special. So Greg, it's great to have you. Can you describe to us what is a typical day like in your job as a recreation assistant supervisor with Lincoln Parks and Rec? Describe to us what does that look like for you?
Yeah, there are a few different aspects to my job. I've often said this is the job where I've had to do the most advanced planning. One of my biggest job duties is uh, summer camp programming. So
Sure.
I spend 9 months of the year planning for 3 months of the year. So at some point each day, I'm thinking about summer camp programming. Uh, Another thing I do is social clubs in the evening. We do three different adaptive social clubs. So I'm always planning and scheduling staff and working out budget for those types of things. And then we also have what we do in-house in our rec center itself. So I'm supervising the building, monitoring programs that are going on within the building. So things that you might think a typical supervisor would do in itself, I'm just doing it at a recreation center.
Fantastic. How many programs are you monitoring at once?
Uh, Throughout the day, two or three, I have 15 staff that do different things, whether it's in the evenings or on weekends.
Okay. So looking beyond the job title or what the resume says or what the job description says, what defines you most in your role and what you do?
Uh, I like to think of myself as someone who provides opportunities and experiences. I sometimes label myself as a facilitator. I feel my job success is based on experience and successes that my participants are having. So, like I said, me providing opportunities and experiences.
Okay. Greg, you described yourself in your blog as an all-American outdoors person. You've done fishing, hunting, you've played basketball, baseball, and all the things that a typical person would do growing up. How did that shape you later on in life, those activities?
I think at a very young age, as you said, I participated in a lot of sports, a lot of recreation, outdoor recreation activities. At a really young age, I learned how valuable those things are to at least my quality of life. And, when I'm lacking those, I don't feel as whole as a person when I don't have that type of activity in my life. So I just want to make sure I'm able to also provide those opportunities for people who are seeking adventure or physical activity or a community. A lot that comes with recreational activities is being engrossed into a community.
Yeah, community is very important. It seems like you were introduced to that naturally, and family was a support as well and encouragement.
Oh, absolutely. Our parents, brothers, sisters, they were there the entire time. The family might provide a little bit of direction. Uh, my parents never said you have to do something because we all wanted to do everything. So credit to my parents for allowing us to pick and choose the things that we wanted to do. They
Hmm.
just wanted to make sure we were doing something.
Absolutely. That's very similar in my upbringing. Get out of the house no matter what.
Yes,
Be
yes.
involved and learn your community. Greg, I'm looking back to 1997 at the time you lost your vision. Um, what kept you moving above and beyond your vision loss? What do you remember most about that period in your life as you were new and adjusting?
Uh, in all actuality, it took me a few months to get moving again after losing my sight. I did have a little bit of a pity party, but I'm happy to say that the pity party did not last long, and I go back to crediting my family as well as my friends. I'm lucky enough now to say that I still have my same three best friends that I had 30 years ago. And it was my friends and in part my family who got me moving again. They made sure I didn't lose myself. They made sure I didn't lose that identity of being an active outdoors person. We still went water skiing. We still went fishing. My 4-H club raised money to purchase me a tandem bicycle that I still have today, that I still use today.
Sure.
Um, so it was really my friends and family who would not let me lose my identity and made sure I still found pleasure in recreation activities.
Can you talk to us about the other side of that? What being introduced to rehabilitation, getting involved with cane training, mobility training, Braille, and those things. How did that evolve at that time, and how did that resonate with you then and now?
Well, naturally, as any parents would do, immediately when I lost my sight, they started looking for resources. And being at the time of my life, I was 18 years old, they got in touch with the California Department of Rehabilitation. I was assigned a VR counselor. You know, kind of showed me and my family the roadmap of what it would look like of going to the Orientation Center for the Blind in Albany, California, finishing up high school, going to college, and ultimately getting a job. After that roadmap was laid out, I said, okay, and I knocked down the doors and I attended the Orientation Center for the Blind, got my cane training in the Bay Area, um, immediately went back, enrolled in community college,
Sure,
learned a lot of things, a lot of skills, that learned a lot of skills the hard way, to be honest. Eh,
sure.
But ultimately, they were skills that or mistakes and errors that I learned from, and ultimately was the commencement was the commencement speaker for my community college, transferred into the 4-year university, Chico State, where I decided to major in recreation administration.
Let me and thank you, Greg. And let me ask you one more question on the rehabilitation process before
Yeah.
I move on. Were there any experiences in your working with Department of Rehabilitation or any community folks at the time that you had to push back, you had to advocate for yourself? They wanted you to go in one direction. You said, no, I'm going in this direction, or they had denied you a technology or an experience that you had to push. Did that ever happen to you? Often it does, and I'm just wondering if so, what did that look like for you?
Uh, hmm. I, ear- Early on in my experience with vocational rehabilitation, I don't recall that happening. However, when I later, after I actually had a job and wanted to pursue more credentials, I did want to become an orientation and mobility instructor. So when I decided to pursue more credentials, I did receive some pushback at that time, but I was diligent. I knew my rights. I knew what buttons to push to ultimately get what I wanted to be able to support my career.
Fantastic.
I also have a wife who knows the process very well also.
Absolutely. I just want to again welcome folks to Career Conversations. Today, our guest is Greg DeWall, Assistant Supervisor, Recreation and Parks, City of Lincoln, Nebraska. Did I get that right, Greg?
Yes, Lincoln Parks and Recreation Assistant
All
Supervisor,
right.
correct.
All right. So, Nebraska. And again, thank you for those who are listening in, watching Career Conversations. You are welcome to drop in the chat your questions, and we will ask them of Greg in a few moments. And that's what drives Career Conversations, the curiosity, the interest from our guests, from our audience, teachers, students, job seekers. Please think of your questions for Greg. Greg, I'm going to turn back to recreation. We often get folks who attend the webinar or who listen later, career conversations to adults who are blind and low vision of yourself to expand upon their career and what worked. And we always try to talk about not just your successes, but the challenges. Recreation was a huge part of your life growing up, and it still is today. And in the time you and I have connected, recreation was always at the core of what you've done. Why is it so important for blind and low vision young folks? And often it's always the last thing that's achieved or conquered. So, what is it that you want to share about that?
Of course, I think recreation is important for all walks of life, but when focusing specifically on the blindness community or the disability community, I know through experience, a lot of people talk about wanting to have a sense of belonging or wanting to have a community or, social experiences. We all know the physical benefits that
Mhm.
come from movement and being active, but the mental and emotional benefits from being a part of a community and whether it's judo that I took up later in life or fishing or beat ball or goalball, when you immerse yourself and you're active doing things alongside people who are also enjoying that activity, there's just so many social, or sorry, so many health benefits that
Yes.
come from that social activity that extend beyond the physical benefits.
And how do you translate that into career readiness and self-sufficiency? That was my next question, and I'm going to kind of tease it into this one. How does being recreationally involved in sports and recreation and leisure activities really prepare one for being career ready to explore the career paths?
In my journey, I think it was the showing up, the getting yourself somewhere on time, the catching the bus or scheduling an Uber, uh, making sure that you're planned and ready for the activity, being able to communicate properly to get to where you're supposed to be. Just, I think of it more as the proper life skills that you need to be able to even pursue a career. Um, you know, Going fishing might not be something you get to do on the job, at least I get to, but most people don't get
Sure.
to go fishing for work. However, the act of fishing, the act of getting ready, checking all the boxes, making sure you're prepared, those a lot of those skills are transferable.
They are. Your experiences in this field, you're working with folks of all types, of all ages, all abilities. Are there any experiences you can resonate or share upon where you've seen a participant in an activity and they got it? There's an aha moment where it's like, I get it, I'm involved. It was a turning point.
Yes, there are a lot of aha moments, of course. I had one participant who was in a social club, and he had multiple disabilities. Um, and after I worked with him and he spent a lot of time around me, he actually ended up applying to be one of my camp counselors. And I eagerly gave him the opportunity to work at my summer camp. And right after that, he applied for a job in Minnesota, which was a full-time position. So, he demonstrated the core skills to be able to satisfy the job requirements. And I was so proud of him and glad that he, beyond, because the summer camp, that's a part-time position, that's a seasonal position. But
Yes,
going from being a participant in a social club to being a camp counselor, then pursuing a full-time job in another state, that's I love that kind of work. And you and I work together long enough in the VR, like we go home patting ourselves on the back at the end of those days.
absolutely, absolutely. Greg, let's go back and talk a little more about judo. You got involved in judo early on. Why did you participate in judo after your vision loss, and what did it give you in beyond fitness? What did you take away from it? I know you went far with it, and I believe you went to many conferences and competitions as well.
Yes, judo took me around the world. I crisscrossed the country. I traveled the globe because of judo. But to answer your first question, I wrestled all the way through high school into college. And when you're done wrestling in college, there's not really, there's not really much else. There's not like NFL or Major League Baseball or NBA. It's not like that. You're just kind of done. So I remember talking to a doctor, and I've always given my doctor credit for this because I don't know that a lot of doctors would tell their blind patient, "Hey, go join judo."
Sure.
But I had that doctor, and I explained to him, "Hey, I'm looking for some more physical activity in my life. You know me, you know my history," and he was the one that encouraged me to do judo. I never anticipated competing in judo the first time I stepped on the mat.
Sure.
Um, I just wanted that physical activity, but as I've mentioned before, what I ended up finding was a community. I ended up finding fellowship, and one practice led to the next. After a few months, my my fellow judoka ended up talking me into competing. Competed at some local tournaments at first, and then started competing across the country. And I ended up now at these tournaments, I was fighting other sided competitors as I was going up through the ranks of white belt all the way to brown belt.
Um,
I was competing against other sided competitors, and I happened to be at a tournament where the international blind judo coach for the United States was there. I had a good day. I went 5-0. I took first place.
mhm.
I got home the next day, and my phone started blowing up, and they were trying to encourage me to come to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs and participate in um, the judo camps for the blind at a very, very high level. And ultimately, I competed on Team USA for 5 years. I won one Paralympic bronze medal, one Pan American silver medal, and went to a couple worlds. So yeah, no, judo was a very good thing for my career. Given how active I was prior to losing my sight, not
Hmm.
just with recreational activities, but that kind of physical intensity. Um,
Hmm.
you know that that's what judo brought back to my life that I was kind of lacking. It was beyond recreation. I always say I get my intensity from judo and my tranquility from fishing.
Right. Um, and so you had a medal, a bronze medal in the Paralympics, and then some others. But um, can you reiterate how did some of these preparation and pressure and self-belief, how did all that preparation in judo show up later in your career after judo was behind you?
That showed up in a couple ways. I think one is, and it's more kind of, I think of myself as a life lesson. Not every day is going to be your best day.
Sure.
And whether it was a judo competition, I didn't win every judo competition I went to, or whether it was practice, not every practice felt good. There was a
Hmm.
lot of practices where I questioned whether or not I belonged competing at that level. But
Sure.
then the next practice might be the best practice I ever had, or the next practice might be a practice where I said, okay, I did that particular move really good today. I feel a lot better about that move. So, like I said, number one is the ability to kind of be kind to yourself and
Sure.
remind yourself that not every day is going to be your best day.
Yes.
Secondly, it's also the riding the highs and the lows, kind of being aware of the highs and the lows. And, you appreciate them more, you embrace them more when you're able to recognize them. Now, going back to kind of the career side of things,
Hmm.
again, it's the showing up, it's the dedicating yourself to your craft. It's being punctual. It's paying attention to the details. And
Hmm.
I think I just said it best. It's dedicating yourself to your craft. You can't go to the Paralympics and not take it seriously. Well, I can't show up at work and not take it seriously.
Sure. And thank you. I really appreciate that insight. Welcome, folks. We are with Career Conversations. Greg DeWall is our guest this afternoon, and you are invited to drop questions in the chat. Let me check with Amy. Do we have any questions in the chat, yeah, Amy?
Not as of yet.
Okay, I'm sure we will. Um, we again encourage and welcome them. I'm going to continue on my interview with Greg. So, Greg, I'm looking at your career. It's your career, to date has spanned direct service, instruction, supervision, and leadership. What role or roles do you think challenge you the most in your career trajectory and where you're at today, and to where you're at today?
As I was previewing the questions, I came across this one, and it's actually one of my favorite questions to answer because it was one of those moments where I really learned a lot about myself. I enjoy being a direct service provider. I enjoy working really closely, boots on the ground kind of person, where I get to witness the participant or the client's successes. So the hardest part of my career, and I compare it to being a teacher in the classroom and going to the principal's office. The hardest part of my career was when I went from being a direct service provider, an orientation and mobility instructor, to being a training center supervisor. And I wanted to work with the students. So to be able to do the supervisory job successfully, I had to learn how to support my staff so they could be better instructors and better direct service providers. Not that I had to distance myself from the students, but I had to learn how to be a good boss, basically. I had to learn how to support the staff so they could do their job well, so our students could be successful.
So what does it take to be a good boss, Greg?
Um, I'm someone who I like a roundtable discussion. I want buy-in from my staff. So to get buy-in, we all have to be on the same page. I have to listen to their needs, their concerns, their wants, so they could do their job better and be able to deliver the things that they're asking for within reason, so they could do their jobs well. And unfortunately, at times, it does come with necessary disciplinary action. But even when that is done well and respectfully, it you know it doesn't make you the bad guy to have to do your job. What makes you the bad guy is when your job is not done appropriately, respectfully, and properly. So, even the hard times, when you handle them with grace and respect, they're still usually received better than they would be otherwise.
And thank you. You've worked both in the blindness specific organizations and the broader disability um, settings. What differences stand out to you between those settings and environments?
Um, Accessibility by nature would be one of them.
Sure.
Usually when you're working for a state agency, a state VR agency, or a nonprofit that works closely with the disability community, accessibility is kind of built in. Uh, how I've gotten very fortunate in that regard is my supervisors, as well as my coworkers, are very open to ideas and suggestions to to start building in accommodation. Whenever something new comes up, I'm asked to test it out for accommodations. I do have to work with money day in and day out. So our office manager, and this is a very small example, but
Hmm.
it does matter to me on a day-to-day thing. She knows how to fold the bills so that I know what they are, and so I could do my job without hiccup. Um,
Hmm.
so there's just accessibility um, being number one. Um, and maybe I'm just fortunate in the environment that I work in,
Sure.
but if I say I can do something, no one questions it.
Yes.
So, I'm very fortunate in that regard.
Let me ask you a question that I didn't prepare for you, but I think you can address this. In looking back at your career and the jobs you've had, what were the obvious and or not so obvious accommodations you needed, you requested, or were provided without question? What did that look like for you in the type of job you have? Because you're not just in front of a computer. You're out and about.
So are you asking for previous or here now in Lincoln?
Let's go with the current one. Let's go with your Parks and Rec job.
Um, so you're right. I am out and about quite a bit. And my coworkers, if they go somewhere, they take their own vehicles and they're able to get reimbursed for mileage. And they have a whole system that they use
Sure,
to be able to turn in mileage accurately. Well, I don't have a car, obviously. So one accommodation that was made for me is I was able to put Lyft on my work phone with the company credit card. So now if I have errands to run and or I have to I often have to go to two or three different parks and recreation facilities throughout the day.
sure.
I just use Lyft, but that accommodation was made available to me. Um, of course, I also have to work with sensitive information, sensitive paperwork. It's
Sure.
not all digital. So, a scanner was provided to me with Pearl and with JAWS so I could OCR things. But rather than all that being available when I got there, as it is in most organizations that work with people that with staff who have disabilities, I had to request all that. None of it was an issue when I requested it, fortunately, but it wasn't built in.
Okay. And thank you, Greg. I do appreciate that. When you look at your degree in therapeutic restoration and your lived experience as a blind person, how do you feel that uh, that was okay, sorry. Let me repeat this again. Your lived experience and your degree in therapeutic recreation being reviewed by employers when you were interviewed, how they complement each other. How do you think that was evaluated by employers when you were being interviewed and considered for positions?
Lived experiences definitely goes a long way because that shows that I have a direct interest, an invested interest in recreation. But I think we all know, as one does with completing college, a lot of us tend to choose a major or degree that naturally interests us, but to an employer, it's the completion of the degree. And it helps that I went after therapeutic recreation because that's the field that I'm in. So again, it shows that invested interest. But I think what's even more important than the fact that I chose therapeutic recreation is the fact that I completed it.
We are, pardon me, we're interviewing Greg DeWall, and this afternoon you're on Career Conversations. I invite you all to write your questions for Greg in the chat, and we will answer them in just a moment. I'm going to go to you with a few more questions, Greg, and we'll check for the chat here. We're going to go to fitness and those activities. So, you use tools like the Fitbit and the fitness challenges in your positions. What have you learned? Uh, Hang on. What have you learned about accountability and community for behavior change when using programs like the Fitness Challenge and Fitbits?
Well, again, going back to the community, I'll answer that part of it first.
Okay,
A lot of us have just by nature, we want to be around other people. And when we're around other people in those environments, whether it be tandem bike riding, walking, running, whatever it might be, what they also tend to motivate. You know,
Hmm.
I might not feel like I could run 2 miles today, but if I'm running with someone and they're encouraging me and motivating me to go another half mile, well, then I might meet my goal of 2 miles. So there's that natural encouragement and motivation that comes from doing activities within a community.
That peer involvement, absolutely.
That peer involvement,
Come on,
yes,
Greg, I'm 10 steps ahead of you. Can you beat this?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
So I now with the Fitbit, you know, being able to see your results, being able to count and tally up your results, when it's one thing to just go for a walk, okay?
hmm
And but if I can set a goal of, okay, today I'm going to walk 5,000 steps.
hmm
Well, when I can actually count that and
Yes.
record it, and then the next day say, oh, well, I did 5,000 yesterday. Maybe I could do 6,000 today. And then 6,000 becomes 10,000, and then 10 becomes 15. And when you're able to track your progress, and then after a short amount of time, you're feeling the physical benefit. So first you have the mental benefit of being able to track your improvement. The physical benefit comes of just feeling better, feeling healthier. So that's where the accountability comes in, is it just being able to track and monitor and actually be aware of your progress.
Yes.
That's why I wish I had an accessible, to be honest, I really, really wish I had an accessible treadmill. I have an accessible rowing machine,
Yes.
and it is so awesome to be able to see, okay, today I rode 5,000 meters. Okay, a week ago I rode 10,000 meters. Sometimes I don't have as much time,
hmm
so I can't spend the length of time on it that I want.
hmm
But I'm really glad I'm able to track my progress. So my accessible rowing machine is awesome. I wish I had an accessible treadmill.
And when you say accessible treadmill, you mean one that's either has buttons and or talks to you versus just a flat screen that's doesn't do much other than turns
It
on if you find the
turns
right
on
button.
and turns off, right? And
Yeah.
and yeah, and being able to track, being able to look at my numbers on my own, whether it's via Bluetooth on my phone, like my rowing machine, for example, it connects to my phone. So I'm looking at the results on my phone. Um, I don't have that ability with my treadmill. So everyone says, "Oh, well, how far did you run today?" I don't know, 45 minutes. I have no idea. I have no
Yes,
idea how far I ran, but I know I ran for 45 minutes.
absolutely. I'm gonna take a break here and ask Amy, do we have any questions in the chat?
We do. One of our attendees in the audience would like to know a little bit more about, Greg, how you became blind.
Okay. So I was a senior in high school, and as Richard mentioned early on, I was kind of your all-American boy. Grew up in a healthy family atmosphere, lots of recreational activities, kind of a jock, wrestling, football, baseball. And I was a senior in high school, got caught up in a moment where halfway through my senior year, I had a moment of panic and literal panic attack where I felt like I was not prepared for life after high school. Even though I had potential scholarship opportunities, I knew I had the military as an option. I knew I could go to the local colleges that were in my hometown, but just something about that moment, I panicked and get could not control my emotions as a 17-year-old senior in high school. I saw the shotgun on my wall and I attempted suicide. I woke up a week later in the hospital, blind, of course, with a lot of tubes and things connected. And immediately I remember having the thought, okay, I'm blind. I'm going to figure this out. And so that's kind of the story of how I lost my sight. I did end up finishing high school and graduating high school and walking with my senior class. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I attended the Orientation Center for the Blind about a year later, and then took off going to college after that.
Thank you, Greg, for sharing. Did we have another question, Amy?
Not at this time.
Okay. Well, Greg, I'm gonna wrap it up here toward getting close towards the wrap up. So again, I invite the audience to send in your questions. Um, Greg, is someone who is wanting to do who doesn't want to be in front of a computer all day, and we know computer skills are important and necessary. I'm not saying otherwise, but in the job that you're doing, you're on your feet, you're in the community, you're active, you're at different sites, your arms are rolled up, you're in the trenches. To a young 19, 20-year-old blind person out there who's like, yeah, I want to be in therapeutic recreation. Where do I start? What advice would you give to them? What guidance? What would you say to them to be successful? Who do they turn to for work experience, volunteer experience in the field that you're doing if they're really truly engaged in wanting to do some type of outdoor camp recreation environment
Uh, Um,
activity?
of course, a lot of towns, a lot of communities have different summer camp programs. And but one thing I would look into your community, see uh, like Lincoln here or like my hometown that had a recreation district. A lot of communities have YMCA's. A lot of communities have boys and girls clubs. And even though I was involved with our recreation district as a teenager, when I was in college, I started working and volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club in the town in my hometown where I ended up going to college. And so that's where I got my foot in the door. That's where I started making connections. And I was able to put that on my resume. So, taking that initiative to go to the Boys and Girls Club and say, hey, I would be happy to work with your after school programs, with your tutoring, with your wellness program, your nutrition program. Um, Not a lot of colleges have a recreation administrative program. I was very lucky that at Chico State there was a recreation administrative program. So if you don't want to leave where you're at, you might want to look at where they have adaptive PE program. There's a lot of similarity, a lot of overlap between adaptive PE and therapeutic recreation. So find out where you can get your foot in the door or start finding resources, whether it be a local college, a YMCA, a Boys and Girls Club, or even your local recreation district. Like in my hometown, it was called Cheeto Area Recreation District. Here in Lincoln, it's Lincoln Parks and Rec. So whatever it may be.
Oh, are we still here?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I okay. it got a long pause. Greg, if you let me get down to my questions. I if you could sit down with your younger self, um, right after vision loss, what advice would you give to your younger self? Career advice,
Ooh, career advice.
or life advice, if that for that matter.
Uh,
Only going back 25 years or so. I
yeah,
get it.
I know, I know. Um, to get started even earlier, you know, I think in my mind at that age, I thought, okay, do one thing before the other. And maybe I was also going through a lot of medical procedures at the time. So, I might not have had the capacity to get started even earlier. But I think in my mind at that age, I told myself, okay, go to college and then get a job. Whereas if I were to go back now, I might try volunteering even more. I might try to do some part-time work even more. Knowing that college was the priority, and graduating college was my ultimate goal. Just the more I could do to network, gain experiences, um, I would have got started even earlier.
Hmm.
And that could mean, going to an orientation center. That could mean going to a blindness training center.
Sure.
Whatever it might be for the individual to get started even
Hmm.
earlier.
Yes.
But I had the skills. I was confident with my skills, and yes, there was a lot of lessons I learned throughout college, but at the same time, I had the skills to be able to show up at the Boys and Girls Club. I had the skills to be able to show up at campus. So yeah, getting started even earlier would be the advice I would have given myself.
Okay. Greg, what's something people still underestimate about blind professionals and recreation wellness, and how do we change that narrative when our profession, your profession, blindness professionals and recreation and wellness are underestimated? Um, what what are your thoughts on that?
My, I, I think it's to lead. I think it's to be put in a leadership position, a managerial or supervisory position. Um, and how do we change that? We keep knocking on the door. And, when I applied for this job, believe me, it was not the first job that I applied for that is on the same tier as this one. I actually think it was the third time I applied for a job with Parks and Rec.
Hmm.
And where I because of our director, um, she believed in me and gave me the opportunity.
Yes.
I do feel that had I been applying for lesser positions, for lack of a better term, I probably would have found a job easier because they wouldn't have seen me as the leader or the supervisor.
Hmm.
Um, but because those were the positions I was applying for, because I feel that's what my experience says I'm qualified for, I wasn't getting them. But I kept knocking on the door. I got it. I hope that I'm changing minds, at least here within LinkedIn, and
Yes.
should other blind people or people with disabilities apply for leadership or managerial positions here in Lincoln,
Yes.
I hope that I've left some credibility behind to where they're also given opportunities to lead.
Well, Greg, it's been a pleasure interviewing you and having you on. I'm going to check one more time to see if we have any final questions before we wrap it up.
We do not.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Greg DeWall, who's the Assistant Recreation Supervisor, Lincoln Park and Recs, uh, for being on this afternoon, Greg. It's always a pleasure to connect with you professionally and personally. Here's a gentleman who doesn't let his blindness hold him back. He's doing unique things out there. Certainly would be great to have more blind professionals in the workplace, in parks and recreation, in leisure, who can get paid to go fish and teach people to fish for a job. Isn't that cool, or what?
So
Greg, yeah, go ahead.
you folks will have the absolute luxury of talking to my bride, Stacy Cervenka, in the future. You will see that we are two completely different people. And something I have always said is my wife will always make more money than me, but I will always have more fun.
That's right. Um, Greg, if someone wanted to connect with you professionally, they wanted to pick your brain about maybe they have a student doing a job shadow or informational interview, are you on LinkedIn and can people find you on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, and Richard, if anyone reaches out to you directly, I give you my permission to share my contact information with them.
Fantastic. Well, you've all been participating in Career Conversations. We are in year 5 and happy to have Greg on this afternoon. I want to thank our audience. I want to thank our facilitators and everyone in the background for helping out. And we will call this a wrap and we'll put this up on YouTube in a few weeks under Career Conversations. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.